You are listening to the We Need to Talk About Oscar podcast, and this is our interview with Michael Sarnoski, the director of A Quiet Place Day One.
Some of it's trial and error. Some of it's you just hope for the best. And, you know there's a feeling that you're trying to achieve with certain things. And if you can hit that sense of magic that you want, then you'll be okay. But some of it, I think not knowing if it's going to work is where some of the best stuff comes from. Is like, if you're certain that you can pull this off and you're certain that everyone's going to be fine with it, then it's probably not that worth doing.
Michael, before we dive deep into this little project of yours called A Quiet Place Day One, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate you on the success of it and just basically its existence, because honestly,
Thank you.
It's one of the most confident yet fresh sophomore features I've ever seen, really.
Thank you so much.
So to start us off, we have this forming, or maybe by now I should say, formed tradition on the show where we start by asking our guests not just how they got into filmmaking, but also how they fell in love with films in the first place. So Michael, what's your story?
I think my story is I fell in love with storytelling. I fell in love with comic books and just stories of all sorts. And then I think through that also came a love of film, which, I think it just came from my dad renting movies on the weekend from Blockbuster, and we would all sit and watch them. And I think I love the visual arts. I love writing. I love all of that stuff. And movies were always just this kind of perfect combination of everything that I adore. And then it just took me a really long time to realize that movies were a thing that I could make as well. It seemed very far away and not like a world that I could access, but I think it came from just a childhood wonder and love of storytelling, and then the gradual growth of learning the technicalities of it and all of that, and sort of, I think, believing in myself enough to sort of be able to do it and realize like, oh, I can understand how to create these moments and create these worlds, and I can do it. And that just took time.
Wonderful. And now here we are. So
Here we are.
I guess it worked out. I did some digging, really not much, but what I came across is Deadline reporting you are in talks to helm the next Quiet Place movie, and this was back in January 2022. Your mind-blowing debut feature, Pig, debuted in theaters across the globe during the summer of 21, for which you won the Independent Spirit Award for Best First Screenplay. And this was almost 2 months after the aforementioned news had broken. Without question, there were loads of people cheering you on, but at the same time, there must have been not so positive voices from not one, but two sides. Either from the fans of the first two titles of the franchise and from the fans of Pig, or just indie filmmaking in general. We all know it very well that you just can't please everyone, but now you have the film itself to show for it. It's a box office success, yet you managed to keep your own voice and infuse it into the project. But back then, in early 2022, you didn't have this, just a celebrated debut feature and the possibility of doing a big or bigger studio film. Take us back to those times. Where was your head at? How did you cope with all the noise while trying to savor the moment?
Yeah, I think so. It was weird because we finished Pig in summer 2020, and because of the pandemic, we sat on it for a year, and then it came out mid 2021. So it was strange because there was this year when the movie hadn't come out. I was just kind of writing some other stuff, thinking about what I wanted to do next, but everything had kind of shut down anyways, so there wasn't much to move forward. And then suddenly Pig came out, and out of nowhere it was like, oh, who's this new young director? Let's get him in a bunch of meetings and all that. And already that felt sort of strange because I was like, oh yeah, I'm meeting to talk about a movie that in my mind I finished a year ago. And like, it was fun to release it and exciting to see people receive it and like it. But it was also already I was kind of far away from it in some ways. And then came the sort of onslaught of meetings. You're meeting with a bunch of production companies and studios and all of this. And I knew that I wanted to be cautious about what I did next, but I also didn't want to be so cautious that I wasn't being like brave, or eventually you're going to have to kind of take a step off a cliff and just be like, let's see what happens. And I didn't want to play it so safe that I was going to bore myself or do something that felt comfortable or repetitive. But yeah, like I had some meetings and I was talking to some people about various projects, and then this meeting with John Krasinski happened where he had seen Pig and he really loved it, and suggested doing this prequel to A Quiet Place, and he really kind of gave me the space to figure out what I wanted to do with it. And initially, my initial reaction was, I don't want to step into a franchise. I don't want to step into a studio film. Like, these are all the sort of classic sophomore film mistakes that people make. And but then I used that to foster, like, hey, here's the version of the movie that I doubt you guys would ever want to make, but I would make a movie about, a dying lady getting pizza. And I sort of found this character that was very much me and very much like the kind of story I would want to approach. And the sort of deal I made with myself in my head was, if they're willing to let me pursue something like this that is very against what a lot of big studio summer blockbusters would be, following a hospice patient who's getting pizza rather than like fighting aliens or trying to escape or any of that stuff, then maybe we can be on the same page and do something interesting. And they were supportive of that, and they said, let's do it. So I tried to just kind of put all those doubts aside and be like, hey, this seems like a weirdly unique opportunity to do something kind of unexpected in a very expected world of, a franchise prequel. And so I kind of just had to like turn off the doubt and just dive into, okay, how would I make this story my own? And how would I make this something that I would believe in and something that I would be excited by? Because, I think part of it came from, I was that voice in my head being like, okay, if I heard they were making a prequel to a horror franchise, I would roll my eyes and be like, why do we need this exactly? And so then I had to think about like, well, then why, what would make me excited about something like this? And that, but, I just kind of ignored a lot of that chatter. And people were actually like pretty gracious about it. Like, I'm sure there's, I get plenty of weird, angry messages about everything, but there's plenty of very supportive messages too, of people saying like, oh, I'm so excited about this, and I was so moved by Pig, and I can't wait to see what you focus on the positive things, and you, at the end of the day, just make something that you care about and you are excited by, and use your doubts to kind of fuel that excitement rather than let it kind of cripple you. But no, it was definitely hard, but I think I kind of wanted it to be hard because I wanted to sort of test what I was capable of.
That's such a great mindset, actually. And now that you bring up John, as the talk started with him and the producing team, and looking back on how these talks progressed, of course, to a point you were sitting on the other side of the table, but in retrospect, what do you see as the selling point of this contained yet large in scale storyline?
Yeah, for me, that is the selling point, is this idea of an intimate, like a heartbreakingly intimate story that takes place contrasted with this sort of epic scale of the destruction of New York. That's what grabs me about it, and that's what excites me. About a lot of stories, is finding ways to make it feel universal in the like scale way, but also universal in the like core emotional way. And yeah, I think that is a big selling point for it. I'm not a marketing person, so I think for like marketing, they're just like, no, it's New York City and there's monsters. That's enough to sell it, which like that probably is enough to sell it. And you could just make a movie that's New York City and monsters and not worry about any of the other stuff. And some people would still go see it and be like, yeah, I got New York and monsters. Cool. But that wasn't, for me, that wasn't the selling point. I didn't, the monsters are just a tool for exploring this world and exploring the characters. all of that stuff is just, it has to sort of be there and it's part of that world. But for me, the kind of human side of the story was what most excited me. And that was what the Quiet Place movies kind of shine with. Like the first Quiet Place, yes, there's monsters and it's a fun idea of like, that you make a sound, you die, all this stuff. But like at its core, it's a really interesting family drama, and it explores kind of characters that you wouldn't expect. And there's guilt and there's resentment and all this stuff. And I liked that, being true to the Quiet Place franchise meant finding a character drama that I found moving and intense and interesting and unique. So for me, that was the selling point.
By the way, what was your pitch like? Was there even a literal, I don't know, classic pitch?
It was terrible. It was I would say it was partially intentionally terrible in that I went to John and then we went to Paramount, and I basically said, I don't know if this is the most marketable version. I would want to follow a dying hospice patient who, when the world ends, she just wants to go get her favorite slice of pizza. In some ways, I think it was a little bit of a test to see, like, are you guys going to go with me on something a little weirder and less expected for something like this? And I think 90% of me expected them to kind of reject that idea and just say, well, we need something more exciting than that and more something for like more conventional. And the fact that they kind of were willing to go down that path with me was that first sort of good sign of, okay, maybe we can pull something unique off. So yeah, my pitch was, I think, 30 seconds long, and it was pretty much that. Initially I said that to Krasinski and he said, heck yeah, let's do it. That's cool. And then we presented that to Paramount and they were supportive of it. And then you spend a long time figuring out how to also bring the things that they want to see in the movie and all that. But, if I could get them behind me following a dying person getting pizza, then that was the initial stake in the ground for me. That was kind of the soul and the core of the movie. And then everything sort of builds around that.
Naturally, we cannot just skip the role of silence, because even though, of course, you did not make a silent film and you did not overdo the silence itself, but it's, as we know, a Quiet Place movie. In what ways did you see place for growth and were able to induce and deepen this setting and the feelings the first two films introduced the viewer to?
Yeah, I was definitely interested in exploring sort of in a world without speech and without sound, how we can communicate through art. So, in this movie, there's things like puppet shows and magic tricks and poetry, and like finding that role of human connection through art, even in this kind of desolate world, was kind of my in for the sound side of it. I knew I didn't want to go down the same path with sign language, and I feel like the first two movies did that so beautifully, and like finding that sort of silent communication. And I felt like I would have been just sort of copying that. So I was like, okay, I want to find these moments of beauty and connection through unexpected artistic expression. And that became a big driving force for Sam's character as sort of a poet that has lost her voice a little bit. And for the puppet show they go to and how Joe kind of connects with her, and it's sort of that became one of the kind of inroads into like how to explore how it can be used and how it can be meaningful.
And at the same time, the lack of dialogue in certain scenes allows for basically the celebration of subtle performances and the actors to play more and more with facial mimicry. How deep do you go in your directing in terms of these aspects of acting? Like, for example, here with Lupita and Joe, do you rather leave more room for the actor to experiment with it, or do you usually tell them specifically what you expect from them?
It depends. It depends. Sometimes in the script, it'll say a very specific gesture they do or something like that. And then sometimes I'll leave it very intentionally kind of open-ended. Like there's a scene where one character I mentioned before performs a magic trick for another character. And part of that was having him learn a magic trick. And then the first time we filmed it, he had never performed that for Lupita. And not giving him guidance on how to communicate the magic trick to her without speech, and watching him have to figure out how to do that, and watching her have to figure out what she needs to do. So the first time we filmed that, she had no idea what to expect. He had never performed it for her, so he didn't know how she was going to interact with it. And that sort of makes it feel organic. They need to find that you see them kind of struggling with like, okay, how am I going to communicate this thing to you? How am I going to get you to do this thing? So sometimes I like to basically, yeah, say what they're trying to communicate and then watch the actor try to communicate that to the other actor in various ways. And that, I think that gives an authenticity to them exploring how that communication would work. So yeah, sometimes I left it very intentionally open-ended, and that was kind of part of the fun of it, because I think you can then capture something more authentic. And I just remember watching Lupita laugh at the end of the magic trick because she was so surprised.
So we expected silence and we got silence, while on the other hand, usually the audience has expectations, and the same goes for sci-fis or sci-fi action dramas. Like in the first minutes of the movie, we learn that our hero is in hospice, her illness is incurable. And if that wasn't enough, the invasion begins or happens, and Sam just does not want to survive. It's a little stupid question, but how do you pull off something like this, hoping or knowing that it won't turn the audience away or result in them being less invested?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of like writing myself into some of those corners of, this on paper, this could be a really hard thing to pull off, to care about. It doesn't have some of the conventional things. I mean, like a horror movie where survival isn't the goal. Like most horror movies, on some level at their core, survival is that big thing. Like, don't get killed by the monster. And when you take that away, like that was part of the fun challenge for me, is like, okay, if I'm going to try and make a movie in a franchise horror world that doesn't feel redundant or unnecessary, like let's try and strip that core thing away. I mean, I think what you have to sort of put in its place is fleshed out characters that feel unique and real and make you want to lean in and make you want to sort of see the world through their perspective. I think almost the entire movie is very much lensed through Sam's perspective and how she's interacting with this world and how she's experiencing it. So you have to be very invested in that experience with her. I think you have to find characters that complement those characters in dynamic ways. You have to surround yourself with actors that are fascinating and going to really like dive into these characters and bring something really real and deep to them. And yeah, I mean, it's tricky. And then you have to know, how far you can push the audience with the emotional stuff before you need to lean into some of the more thrilling elements, and vice versa. Some of it's trial and error. Some of it's you just hope for the best. And, there's a feeling that you're trying to achieve with certain things. And if you can hit that sense of magic that you want, then you'll be okay. But some of it, I think not knowing if it's going to work is where some of the best stuff comes from. Is like, if you're certain that you can pull this off and you're certain that everyone's going to be fine with it, then it's probably not that worth doing. But if you're like, I don't know, this might be just on the edge of what people are able to deal with and tolerate, that's more exciting. It's more exciting for the filmmaker, and it's more exciting for the audience. If you're just giving stuff to people that like they already know they'll be fine enjoying, then it's just, it's just kind of fast food.
And this is what test screenings are for.
Yeah. You test it out and you see like, okay, are we stretching the audience out too thin here? Are we expecting too much of them? Are we spoon feeding too much to them? Are we like, all that? Are we hitting the emotion that we want with the ending? Like the ending, that final shot of the movie was a big thing for me, and knowing if I could pull that off without it feeling miserable and kind of triumphant in its own way. Like it's what you're trying to achieve, and then you just keep playing with it until you achieve that.
And then there is that much talked about scene where, when shit is going down and everyone is going one way and Lupita is going the other. Once again, this might be a little weird analogy, but have you had a moment in your career where something seemed like the most obvious and logical step for everyone else, yet you did something else, went another way, because you felt as if that was the right decision and path to take for you and for your career?
Yeah, I think that was how my career started. Was for a long time I was working with other people, helping other people do the things that they wanted to do, because I don't think I had a voice yet of my own. And part of that was because I don't think I believed in myself enough to believe that I sort of deserved to have a voice of my own. And I think finally taking that risk and being willing to, with Pig, like I'm going to write something that is for me, that's the kind of movie that I would enjoy and that I engage with, not because I think it's going to sell, not because I think it can be franchised, not because I think it's like the kind of thing that will get a bunch of money. Like I'm just going to do it because it speaks to me, and sort of being willing to kind of trust in your own North Star, for better or worse, knowing that, it might not, it's like what you asked before, like it might not work. Even if it works for you, it might not work for the masses. And that's sort of okay. That doesn't mean it's not worth exploring and trying, because that's how we kind of push boundaries. So yeah, I think I feel that way a lot, where like I need to, yes, you're making movies for audiences and you want people to engage with them, but you don't want to make it too easy for anyone. You want to find things that have to be you to tell those stories. Like that I have to be the one sort of figuring out what I'm trying to say and how I'm trying to say it, so that it feels unique and it feels like there's a real voice, and the audience feels like they're actually interacting with something human and real, rather than just being sort of fed whatever march of the crowd is expected.
Another thing we can't not talk about is obviously Frodo the cat's character, what became a little bit of a sensation. Animals are really well functioning assets to at times even lead the way for the audience and kinda emerge like here as this vessel of certainty and unwavering being or life form when nothing is as it was. We know there are some logistical difficulties accompanying shooting with animals, although I can't even imagine the variety of challenges it can pose. Yeah. But at the same time, were there any, apart from the obvious, unexpected ways Frodo's presence took the production on a trajectory that then had a glorious payoff?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of ways. One big thing was, I remember early on, Frodo's in every scene of the movie almost. And I think it set a nice precedent that early on, a lot of people were saying, okay, so this is going to be like a CGI cat. And saying, no, we're not going to do a CGI cat at all like this. We're not going to build a model for this cat. Like, we're going to be filming this real cat interacting in real ways. It set a certain like tone of like, okay, this is how we're approaching this movie. Like, there's a reason why, especially if you're telling a kind of unconventional story, like you need to believe in these characters. You can't feel like you're watching a cartoon. Like, you have to feel like these are living, breathing characters. You have to feel like Sam is that way. You have to feel like Eric is that way. And you have to feel like Frodo is that way. Because it makes it even more important that you can like really sink your teeth into these things. And that was important. I think the fact that Lupita was really afraid of cats going into this movie, she didn't like cats at all. I mean, she's an incredible actor and she's going to go for it. But like, I think that was the fact that she was willing to do that and willing to kind of fall in love with cats. I have to imagine that helped her dive deeper into this character and really helped her immerse herself in this, because by the end of it, you really believe that she loves this cat and she does love cats now. And like, I think that was sort of an unexpected, initially when I heard that she didn't like cats, that she was afraid of them, it was sort of, I worried about that. And then watching how intensely she was willing to work on that and to fall in love with these cats and to become that character of Sam just showed her commitment and showed how deeply she was willing to dive into this character. And I think that ended up being a real asset. Yeah. And I think the cat was like an important balance of, we knew we were telling an emotional story and a character driven story, but you don't want it to be overly sentimental or saccharine. And like, you need some of that stuff, but you don't want to go so far that you start rolling your eyes. And a cat's a good barometer for that. Like, you don't want to film so much of this cat that is just like, hey, look at the cute cat doing cute cat stuff. Like, something as fundamental as an animal, how do you use that to keep moving the story forward and to invest people in the right moments in the right way and not just spam them with cutesiness and things like that. So I think it was another exercise in sort of the balance of the film. So yeah, I think there were a lot of ways that sort of the cat being there helped regulate some of that stuff.
Now, if you allow me, I'm going to attempt not too much, but a slightly provocative question regarding budget, which is a little unusual, but I think justified. Despite the fact that studio movies' budgets ballooned in the last couple of years and they started like, I don't know, $100 million, Day One has a 67 mil price tag on it and has so far made near 250, which is, wow, once again, hats off to you and your amazing team. Would you have done this film on a considerably bigger budget?
No. I mean, I think this was the right budget for this film. I think I'm a big believer in shoot a film at the right budget. Don't just get money for the sake of money. Like, figure out what this movie needs to be and figure out how much money you need to make that the case. And I think there's a lot of budgetary bloat, especially in franchises. I mean, I think it helps that we're a prequel spinoff, so it's like, this isn't, you get a little bit of a fresh slate with contracts and things like that, which helps. But like, yeah, I think it would have been really wasteful to, go into like Marvel territory on this. Not that, I mean, Marvel movies is sort of a reason why they cost so much. But yeah, I think you should make a movie for what the right amount is. And I think going much more than that would have been, it starts feeling wasteful, and it starts feeling like it puts undue pressure on the project to make more money back. And you have to start watering it down so that it appeals to the mass market more. And yeah, I think the more you bloat the budget, the more pressure it puts on it to be more generic sometimes.
I would imagine the bigger the budget, the less room there is for improvisation.
Yeah.
Secondly, how can one overcome this? How did you overcome this hindering factor?
I mean, at the end of the day, you're just having conversations with your heads of department, and you're talking creatively about what you're trying to achieve and why. And I think it's focusing on, like, instead of what could we do, because with a bunch of money, you can do whatever. Like, it's what should we do and why. And I think I approached it similarly to the way I approached Pig, where it was, I wasn't, yeah, we had a lot more toys to play with, but that doesn't mean you should constantly be playing with the toys. And that doesn't mean that you should make every scene a big action scene just because you can. Like, I think it just forces you to be focused on characters, be focused on what the story is supposed to be and what the right way to tell it is, rather than, what the craziest, most expensive way to tell it would be. And I think that's sort of, especially with Pat Scola, the cinematographer that I work with, like, that's how we like to approach things. I think we've made a tiny, tiny movie and a big movie. And next up, we're making a kind of mid-range movie. And for all of them, it's the same thing. We go through the script, we talk about what we're trying to communicate, and we talk about what the right way to shoot that scene to communicate that would be. Sometimes it requires an expensive piece of equipment. Like if you're shooting in a subway tunnel underwater, you have to get some cranes that can go underwater and all this kind of crazy stuff. But sometimes it means you're going to save money because you find a simple single shot that is the perfect shot to communicate what you want to communicate. So at the end of the day, it's sitting down with talented people and figuring out what the right way to approach scenes is.
And last but not least, back to working with animals. I recently spoke to your cinematographer, Pat Scola, and we talked about the inclusion of animals in your 2 features so far and the hurdles of shooting animals. I mean, shooting with animals.
Yeah.
But of course, the former has its challenges too.
Yeah.
We know that your next feature is going to be the death of Robin Hood. And Robin Hood surely calls for a horse or something, a horse with a big personality, or I don't know. Not that you need my advice.
Yeah.
And correct me.
You want
if
a
I'm
talking
wrong.
horse in the movie? Okay, fine. Have a talking horse. Are you asking, will there be animal roles in Robin Hood? Is that the question?
Yeah, but it's only a half serious final question. So
There will, at the moment, there's not. I mean, the pig was very important to Pig, but honestly, it was only in like the first 15 minutes of the movie, and it's sort of something that hangs over the movie. Frodo was in the whole movie. That was a lot, but it was really worth it, and it was fun, and they did an amazing job. Robin, because of the world that it exists in, there are definitely animals. I don't think there's going to be like a Frodo level animal where there's an animal in every single scene kind of thing, but you want it to feel people were very connected to the land back then and very connected to the animals, and there's definitely an element of that. So there will be animals in Robin. There's not going to be a cat in every scene. Or a talking horse, unless I'll sleep on the talking horse. We'll see.
Right?
Yeah.
But maybe, just maybe, the audience will prefer to focus on Hugh Jackman and Jodie Comer. But just maybe.
Yeah, they're pretty fun to focus on. They're pretty incredible. So So maybe we won't need too many animals. But I love working with animals. I think there is something real about them. Like when you watch them, you know that what you're seeing on some level is authentic because they can't really fake it. I've said this before, but like it's the same reason I like food in movies, because watching someone eat food in a movie, even if it's, Brad Pitt downing a hamburger, like there's something real about that. Like, that's not fake. Like it's something that you can connect to on a visceral level. And I like that kind of stuff.
So animals for you are what eating for Brad Pitt is.
Yeah. Eating and animals are both authentic things on screen.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time. Absolutely loved A Quiet Place Day 1 and can't wait for the next.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful.